Hey guys, GameDevLuuk here with a new tutorial. We're continuing on our last tutorial, which was destructible terrain using Unity tile maps. Now we're gonna add an artillery shooting mechanic. With an artillery shooting mechanic, I mean something like you see in Worms, where you have a character, they can aim at a certain angle and then fire with a certain power. And then the bullet travels, using that angle with that power and has a certain trajectory. So that's what we're gonna do in this tutorial. I hope you learned something new. Enjoy. Alright, so this is where we left last time. I made a procedurally generated terrain using Perlin noise, and now I'm gonna add a player prefab to this, and I already made it here. And this is what we have. We have a player, we have a power visual, which is this cloud circle, and this represents the max amount of power that we can have. We have an angle visual, which is the arrow, which is gonna visualize the angle that we have that we want to shoot at, and it will also scale based on the power. And then I have a canvas which is set to world space, and it's really small, 0.01, with two labels. One is the angle label and one is the power label. So these are going to represent the values that we have currently set for our angle and our power. Now I'm going to make a couple of new scripts. First of all, I'm going to make a player aiming script, and in this script, in the update function, I'm going to check if we are pressing mouse buttons, and while the left mouse button is pressed, we will calculate the angle and we will calculate the power. So we're doing that every frame when the left mouse button is pressed, and if we're releasing that left mouse button, so get mouse button up, we are gonna fire projectile. So while it's being pressed, we're calculating stuff, what angle, what power, and when we release, we immediately fire our projectile. So first, let's take a look at the power. For the power, I'm gonna add a couple of variables here. I'm gonna have a public int min power, which is gonna be 0, and max power, which is gonna be 100. And then I'm gonna add another int cur power, which stands for current power, using Unity engine.ui. Here we're gonna say aim sprite and then text power label. Then I'm gonna go to calculate power, and here we wanna see how far the mouse position is away from the player. And based on this, we want to increase the power. So I'm going to say factor3 mouse position is camera.main.screen to world function, which Unity has. And then we're going to give this the current mouse position. Then we're going to set the mouse pos.z to 0 because we're working in 2D. Then we're going to check the distance, and we're doing this by the factor3.distance method between the mouse position and the transform.position, which is going to be this tank. And then I'm going to call another method, update power, and I want this power as an int. So now it's an int. So in update power, I'm going to say current power is the clamped value of amount between min power and max power. So it cannot be lower than 0 and it cannot be higher than 100. And then in current power here, I'm going to say imsprite transform local scale is new factor2 current power divided by 12. And we're going to set the power label .text power plus the current power. In update power, we're going to do the distance times 2. And on my player prefab, I'm going to add this player aiming script, and I'm going to open my prefab and set the references here. We have an aim sprite, so it's going to be the angle visual, the power label, which is going to be the power label. Let's test this out. So when I click my left mouse button now, you see the power is 2. When it's very close to the tank, it's 0. And when I start moving my mouse, it increases. Drag it very far away, and then it's 100. And you can also see that our arrow is scaling based on the power. And why am I dividing by 12 here? Because I want the arrow to exactly be at the round sprite so that it matches up. Then we're going to take a look at the angle. So in calculate angle, we're going to check the mouse position again, just like we did before. We're gonna set the Z position to 0 again. Then we're gonna get a vector between the mouse position minus the transform.position position. So this is the direction vector. And then we're gonna calculate an angle. using the 8 and 2 method, direction Y, direction X, and we're going to multiply this with this function. The 8 and 2 returns a radians value and we need a degree value. So we're going to do this by multiplying with this. And then we're going to say update angle, and also here we're going to cast to an int, and then we're going to pass through the angle. And then here I'm going to make a new function, update angle. Update angle, we're going to say current angle. Oh, I forgot to make my variables. First we're going to make some variables, current angle, and we're also going to make a label, public text angle label. Back in update angle, we're going to say current angle is going to be the angle that we pass through. And then we're going to set the rotation of our aim sprite to match up with this angle. And for this, we're using quaternion angle axis, and we're giving it the current angle, and we're using factor 3 forward as our axis it should rotate on. And we're going to update our label just as we did with the power. Opening the prefab and then filling our missing fields here. When I hold my left mouse button, you can see that this arrow is following where my mouse is. So that's working pretty well. And also if I drag it all the way to the end, you see that it's scaling still, so that's looking good. You do see, however, that at my angle is below 0, it starts to go minus, and I think it would be nicer if the angle is from 0 to 360 space. So let's fix this, and I'm gonna do this in a very ugly way. If the current angle is smaller than 0, so if it's minus, we're gonna say current angle plus is 360. And let's do this before we set the text. So if the angle goes below 0 now, you see that instead of going to minus, it goes to a 360. And now it works again. So now we have our angle and our power set up. Now we have to fire a projectile that actually uses these values. I'm gonna make a new script called tank shooting. Tank shooting is gonna have a game object, public game object, projectile, prefab. So this is the prefab that will be fired. And it's gonna have a public transform muzzle, which is the place the projectile will fire from. Then it will have only one method, fire projectile. We're going to use the power as parameter. And here we're going to say game object instantiated projectile is instantiate. So here we're spawning the projectile. So we're spawning the projectile prefab. We're spawning this at the muzzle transform position because the muzzle is the thing we're shooting from, and we're also going to use the muzzle transform rotation, and this is going to be our aim visual. Because we are rotating our aim visual, we can use this rotation, and then the projectile automatically has a good rotation because it just uses it the same. I'm going to say instantiated projectile, get component, projectile, which we still have to make, and then we're going to say initialize. And we're going to give this the power that we received through here. So first I'm going to go back to player aiming, and I'm going to call this method. I'm going to have a public tank shooting script here, shoot script. And once I release my button, mouse button here, I'm going to say shoot script, fire projectile with the current power. I'm going to make a new script called projectile. And in projectile, let's start with making that method, initialize. You can initialize with int power as a parameter. I'm going to do a couple of things in this projectile. First, we're going to have a rigid body, which we call RB. We're going to have a public float, a lifetime, public float, radius, public game object, explosion, prefab. We're going to set up this reference, rigid body get component, rigid body 2D. And then in initialize RB, add force, transform.right times the power divided by 2, because I thought else it would go way too hard. And we're going to use force mode.impulse. Do some invokes, invoke explode. So I want this projectile to explode after some time, so it doesn't keep alive forever. So after 3 seconds, it will call this function. And also I'm going to do an invoke enable collider. because I don't want the collider to be enabled immediately, because then it would collide with itself. Or we could use layers, but I thought for me this worked out best. So after 0.2 seconds, I'm gonna turn on the collider, enable collider method, get component, collider to the enabled is true. I'm gonna do the explode method, explode. And here I'm using some things I already had in my project. You can see them in my previous video, but for now I'm just gonna copy paste them in. The important thing for this tutorial is that you're gonna destroy the projectile here. I'm just adding some things like a camera shake and some particle effects that you get a little explosion and that stuff. Let's see what we have right now. So I made a prefab projectile. I've added the explosion FX here. I've added a collider, which is standard disabled. And I added a trail renderer. And now I'm gonna go to my player prefab. And in the shoot script, I'm gonna add the shoot script. And I'm also gonna drag the shoot script in this inspector value here. I'm gonna add the projectile prefab to the tank shooting script. And for the muzzle, I'm gonna set this as the angle visual. Very important to set it up like this, else it's not gonna work. And actually we have to put this in awake, because when the projectile now spawns, initialize gets called immediately and it gets called before the start. So my bad here, we have to use awake here. And there we go. I can now shoot my projectile, as you see. And if I turn the power really high, you see that it goes faster. If I turn the power really low, it goes slower. So that works. I'm just gonna add one more thing, and that is to check if we hit something with an on-trigger enter. On-trigger enter, and if we hit anything, doesn't matter what, we're gonna say explode. And now you also see that my destructible terrain works. If I turn the power really high, you can see the bullet travels really fast. If I do upwards, you can see it goes up and down, but you also see that the bullet does not rotate where it's going. You see here, it keeps the original rotation. So that's one last thing we're gonna fix. And in the projectile in update, we're gonna say, just gonna copy and paste it in here. We're checking the velocity we're going, we're getting the angle using the 8 and 2 and red to degree method again. So we're looking at the velocity here at the Y and the X. And then with angle axis, we're rotating towards the angle using this forward axis. I didn't notice myself, had to Google it, but now you see the bullet rotates to where it's going. So that's it. That's the artillery tutorial. So that was our tutorial. We now have a tank that shoots artillery style and explodes the terrain. We're getting along pretty nicely with our tutorial. I hope I see you in the next one. And please, if you want to stay up to date, comment, subscribe, or like this video. Thank you. Have a nice day.